Smash!
Hey, today we're bringing back the Quar Tractors series with the Squeedle. Gotta admit, does give me a bit of an ego boost that you guys want to see the Squeedle so badly. If you're not familiar, the Squeedle is a tractor used by the Gloamers, my personal faction that's been added to Quar. In this episode, I'll go into further detail on the lore behind the tractor, I'll give you some extra lore on the Gloamers, and I'm going to show you how I paint that classic Gloamers teal and how to freehand the Gloamer snail. Do want to mention before I get into anything else that I do plan on doing more Quar painting tutorials within the near future. Production is getting stepped up and now I have more time for actually painting. But before we get into all that good stuff, make sure you leave a like, comment, and subscribe, share with a friend, and if you really dig it, consider becoming a channel member. YouTube is effectively my job, and as a result, it is my only source of income, so if you become a channel member, it is incredibly appreciated. For just $3 a month, you get to see my videos early, and for $5, you get access to a weekly Q&A stream in which I'll showcase your minis. Just want to give a huge thank you to my channel members. And if you're interested in anything Wargames Atlantic related, especially Quar, you can use my affiliate link down below, and you can use my discount code MISHMASH5% to save 5% on your purchase. But enough of the promotional stuff, let's get tucked in, have a moth cake, and let's talk about the Squeedle. The Squeedle, originally designated as the Skink, was first engineered by the Crymuster Mechanical Corps as a light anti-tractor tractor, to perhaps one day replace the outdated Rhyfles. The Squeedle is designed for rapid response and versatility. These nimble little tractors were initially intended to counter and disrupt enemy tractor units with precise and swift maneuvers. However, the cost to produce these machines far exceeded Koftir's budget, as the initial process for actually getting Squeedle off the ground was during the Crusader invasion in 1771. As resources were allocated to the Crymuster's riflers, these Squeedles were ultimately sidelined. Many of the prototypes were mothballed for a decade, and the revival seemed very unlikely. But thankfully, in 1781, Koftir's urgent need for reinforcements prompted the resurrection of the Squeedle project. The Western Iron Yarn invasion was the catalyst. But rather than simply shipping out these old prototypes, the original design underwent significant modifications. For the first time ever, Koftir had a formidable contender against the Crusade's latest Althene models. However, as the Western Iron Yarns advanced into both Koftir and the allied Krivish territory, production was hastened to field a small battalion of the Agile Tractors. By 1782, the Gloamer forces had deployed into Kriven to support the RCF, and they were armed and supplied with the long-anticipated Squeedles. Their arrival sparked mixed reactions, especially among veteran Crymuster forces. The idea of the Gloamers getting this new piece of tech felt a little unfair, but in spite of that, the Squeedles against Fosgilde forces quickly proved their worth. Nicknamed the Door Knocker and Ankle Biter by Western Iron Yarn forces, these tractors became a notorious thorn in the side of the Fosgilde, deftly evading the clunky Danefen gun houses, and even harassing the Teluharn iron houses. These little tractors were adept at exploiting the weaknesses of these giant iron behemoths. A one-on-one fight is a different story, of course, though the main tactic of utilizing the Squeedle is pack hunting. Beyond the fixed gun and single-line treads, the biggest weakness of the Squeedle is the numbers game. To truly utilize the Squeedle is to have more than one, and there really aren't a lot of them out there. A key element to mention is, what do the Gloamers think of this thing? Well, many of the Gloamers are accustomed to the steadier pace of traditional patrols, and they found the Squeedle's high-speed engagements overwhelming. But others grew to love its agility and rugged reliability, treating it more like a daring partner in combat than a mere vehicle. Though their rough handling of the Squeedles often appalled Koftir's Keratins, who saw the Gloamers' harsh treatment as careless, the Gloamers, however, took it as a tribute to the Squeedle's resilient design. Gloamer crews often employed daring tactics like hiding Squeedles half-submerged to ambush patrols. And that's not to mention the flat-out tactic of abandoning the Squeedles in occupied zones only to return when the enemy had passed through. Hell, there have been anecdotes of faux sabotage taking place. Squeedle crews would take advantage of the modular gearbox and just casually dismantle pieces of critical components. All of this to create a fake mechanical failure in the face of overwhelming odds. An added bonus over survival is it gave plenty of Arnarn forces the idea that the Squeedle was unreliable and unworthy of attention. But all in all, it's a great little piece of machinery. You can ask the Gloamers, they love these things. And since there is no official regiment of how these things are placed, most of them have their own iconography. There's no true color scheme to the Squeedle, it's kind of any man's game. But in my personal opinion, my favorite color scheme I've ever designed for these things is the classic teal. So let's get into how I paint that. Now to start things out, I basically do the same thing for just about every tractor in Quar. I like to zenithal prime my Squeedle with a little bit of German Panzer Grey, and I'll spray over it using a mixture of Khaki and dark Ivory. I like to use a sputtery mix. Some people may not like this, but I prefer it, as it gives plenty of extra detail and extra character underneath the colors that we're going to spray over it. Once the first round of our undercoat is complete, we will spray over using some speed paint in the form of Prismatic Bolt. This teal is essential. This is a rather thin speed paint, so using the airbrush is my preferable method. If the paint splotches, I really don't mind, as it's fitting for the environment that the Gloamers reside in. If you don't like this, however, I would just suggest using your regular brushes. This is kind of common practice for me for just about every tractor I paint, as I don't think they should look nice and shiny. And if you're familiar with my content, you should know I like to make them look nice and weathered. Now, after giving the main color some time to dry, I'll be using some Black Legion and I'll be painting in all the metallic bits with this paint. While you could just thin down any black paint that you have, I find that Black Legion is a godsend for painting larger areas like this, as all I have to really do is dry brush over it to make a really nice looking silver. Of course, mind you, I do want to be careful when applying this, as I don't want to flick this paint onto many portions of the overall paint job. If I do, it's not the end of the world, as I can just work it into the scheme, but it's best to work with a little bit of caution. Though I don't mind making lemonade out of lemons with some of my mistakes, I like to more deliberately weather the Squeedle. Now once the black is dry, we'll be dry brushing over all the metallic areas using some dark silver from Acryl. Rather than lightly flicking this color over the black areas, this is a rather heavy dry brushing. We'll still be showing plenty of that black undercoat through, however, as this gives us a more natural shaded look, and it just looks naturally more rough. Alternatively, though, you could use a warm brown undercoat mixed with the black to create a more worn and torn look to the treads. However, I usually do it like this for the Squeedle, but again, it's up to you. Any way is perfect. Now once you're satisfied with the silver placement on the Squeedle, we'll begin by painting the flag that every Squeedle is adorned with. I've designed a couple different variations, however my favorite is the snail. These little snails are actually representative of giant snails, of which the Gloamers use to fabricate their dyes. But as for the color we'll be using, it is a 50-50 mix of dark purple mixed with royal purple from Acryl. These two colors mixed together provide a very creamy and smooth mixture, and I find it rather easy to apply this to the flag if we leave the zenithal intact. Like with everything, we're going to be applying 2 thin coats of this mixture, and then we can move on to highlighting this color upwards. But while this mixture dries in the meantime, I'll be applying some weathering in the form of Parasite Brown and Mahogany. I'll be utilizing these colors by watering them down just slightly and using them as a somewhat shade of sorts in the recesses. I do like using rust streak paints, however my preferred method is to use basic acrylics, as I find I have more control over them. This isn't exactly new ground that I'm breaking, but I like to paint this into the recesses of rivets, any sort of little dints and dents on the paint job, and anywhere that I can create more visual interest. And all I really do is simply paint it from the source and then slowly drag downwards. Again, it's very similar to how oil paints are used. I just kind of prefer it this way, as I like how it stains better. Now coming back to the metallic, I'm going to be shading this using a mixture of Oblivion blackwash, 3:1 with Battlemud wash. I like to always mix these two colors together, as they are my favorite shades, and using a little bit of that Battlemud wash really adds a lot more character to the overall color of the metallics. I'll also be using this mixture a little bit on the flag. I also decided that this Squeedle was a little too intact, so I decided to go even further with some of the weathering. Again, I'm just using the same methods I used prior. But to up the ante, I'll be adding in some orange to the Parasite Brown, and I'll be doing essentially a recess shade into all of the portions of the teal, and I'll be shading this all over the metallics and the treads. Again, another reason why I like painting the Squeedle using this teal color is I find that the oxidized orange really bounces well off of this color. Now, we did stray away from the flag for a little bit to do some weathering, but now we're going to be layering over the base purple and the shade using a mixture of some dark ivory mixed with our previous mixture, this being dark purple and royal purple 1:1. We'll be layering this over the raised surfaces. You can leave the recesses shaded, but it doesn't exactly matter as we'll be layering over this color as well. This time, however, I added a little bit of magenta to the mixture. This is more in line with the fatigues of the gloamers as I like to paint them. I prefer to have a far more warmer purple rather than a cool purple. Now, because I can't help but love weathering all too much, and I like to give myself breaks in between the portions I don't like painting, and to do this, we'll be first making a watery mixture of warm brown and orange. Keeping it watery is key, however, and as you can see, the brush I'm using is rather bushy and kinda worn out. What we're doing is similar, if not identical, to how I do some of my blood effects. Just simply loading up the brush and using my airbrush to blow at the mixture, creating a rather sporadic and random splatter over the Squeedle. This gives so much character, and it can create a lot of interesting color depth. But like I said, a big key factor is keeping this mixture watery. Doing this too thickly can create a lot of issues, as if it's too thick and you want to remove it, it can create stains that are less than desirable. And if you want, you can add in different variations. I like to use just a little bit of mahogany watered down significantly as well, as it creates, well, more color depth. And as you can see, just doing this creates so much more visual interest on the shell. It looks worn and rather lifelike in my opinion. And if you overstep these colors, you can water down your brush a little bit and drag it downward on the paint, and this kind of gives the effect of water damage. It's really fun. It's kind of addicting, to be honest. But now to really get wacky with the overall weathering, I'm going to be using some pigment powder from Vallejo, this being burnt umber. This is probably my favorite neutral pigment powder out of any, and though some may consider this cheating, if you're not cheating, you're not trying. Seriously, this really makes the treads pop out at you. I'll also be dry brushing this onto sort of the recesses of the tread guards. Again, you don't have to, you can paint it as clean as you like, but I prefer doing it this way. I do, however, like to aim this more down towards the lower portion of the tractor, as painting it higher up doesn't exactly make much sense logically. But then again, it's your model, you do what you please. Now, another method that I do think is a little extra is dry brushing over the sides using a little bit of mahogany and black. This creates a little bit more of a paint chipped effect, but if you don't want to do it, I don't blame you. And because I'm a one-trick pony, we'll be doing one of my tried and true methods of weathering. To create some chips on the paint, I'll be using some khaki mixed with prismatic bolt, and I'll be sponging over the main portion of the armor. Because I mixed a speed paint with a regular paint, this is very malleable, so if there are any defects in the paint or it looks a little too streaky, it's really easy to just wipe away. And of course, if you want to, you can simply freehand on the chips or any scratches onto the Squeedle. Though, however, you can see I'm adding in very stark highlights. The stronger they are, the more they'll stand out. And while it does look a little ugly during this stage, it's worth it. Some people prefer adding in the darker chips and then adding the highlights around them. However, I find it a lot more easy to add in the highlights and then add the chipped effects inward. Speaking of, we'll then fill in all of these chips using a little bit of Dryad Bark. I mean, this isn't Dryad Bark, but it's a close mixture. I would strongly suggest using Dryad Bark as it is the best color I've ever used for filling in chips. And like I always say, I've done this a million times on the channel, this is super duper satisfying. But once you're done filling up all your chips, we'll want to add a gloss varnish over the flag. The reason I'm doing this is I'll be adding a decal in the form of a circle. This comes from the Space Marine kits, But if you don't want to add a decal and just freehand the circle, be my guest. I'm just not that great with freehand, and I'm impatient. And honestly, this is a method you can take advantage of far more than simply using a circle. But once the decal is fully adhered to the model and given plenty of time to settle, we'll be painting over this using some Imperial Fist. This yellow is perfect for matching with the purple, and because we used a white decal, it applies effortlessly. Now once the Imperial Fist dries, we'll be applying a varnish over this being satin varnish. Some people prefer matte, I'm more of a satin guy. But once that's set, we'll then begin freehanding the snail symbol. For this, I mixed together dark purple with some black. However, the first Squeedle I ever painted, I used burnt red from Vallejo game color. But this is fine. Now to really start painting the snail, the first thing I try to do is establish the head. This is so I can make sure that I don't take up too much space, and so I can make sure that I have room for the eye stalks. Once the main bulb that is the head is complete, I'll then start branching underneath to create the main body of the snail. I'll be very, very diligent during this. You don't want to go too fast, and above everything else, you want to make sure that you don't take up too much space. So for the back tail of the snail, you don't want to have it reach the entirety of the end of the circle. Once you've extended the main portion of the body to the back end, we can then begin painting in the shell, and this is pretty simplistic. You just want to paint a nice big bulb. Make sure you have a good tip on your brush while doing so, of course. This will provide more intricate details, and you really don't want to spill this color on the yellow. It'll be a pain in the ass to clean up. Just be diligent and give yourself a little bit of patience to fill in all these areas. And then once everything is fully filled in, then you can attempt to paint the eye stalks. This really isn't that difficult, all things considered. It's just two slight lines, and you'll have enough space that it really doesn't matter if one is bigger than the other. But as you can see, I'm reapplying my stance to really have a nice grip on my brush and the overall model. This is so I can just very gently start and drag down and create this detail without effort. Don't try to paint upward, dragging down is far easier. And with that, the snail is complete. It's really simplistic, it's not that detailed, but you can't tell me it doesn't fit the setting, and it looks absolutely adorable. But to finish up the flag, I'll be painting the top post just using a little bit of bronze. I don't really bother highlighting or shading this. It really ties everything together, and overcomplicating it is not something I really care about. So instead of fussing with that, we'll be fussing with the metallics one final time by dry brushing over them using some Vallejo game color silver. This is one of my favorite silvers. It is very bright, very stark, and adding this over the already established worn metallics creates a lot more interesting details. It looks really scratchy, and it's so bright that it makes everything that it does highlight stand out all the more. Might also notice that I dry brush over this on some of the broader sections. This is just to create a little bit more of a worn metallic finish. But to drive everything home with the flag, we'll be messing with it one final time by mixing together a little bit of white with the purple mixture, and we'll just be highlighting this on the raised surfaces. I just want to be very diligent and add in a little bit of scratchy details. I'm not going in for anything crazy. Just mixing these colors together and sponging it in certain areas can really make it stand out. I don't really like painting this portion. Even though it does really tie the Squeedle together, I like to go just a little splotchy, and it really does do the trick. But with that, our Squeedle is complete, and it looks pretty damn fantastic. I did get a little lazy and I only painted one side of the flag, but I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I'm also kind of impressed with myself for actually recreating a recipe that I created prior, so yay for me. But again, gotta say, I'm very happy that you guys like this tractor as much as I do. And I'm glad you like the glommers. Like always, you can get your mitts on them at zombiesmith.com. And let me know what tractor you want to see next, along with any Quar miniatures for that matter. I got plenty that I gotta work on, and I'm actually partially way through some of them, so you can expect more in the future. Well, like always, I've definitely been flapping my beak enough for one video. Make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, share it with a friend, and remember to mishmash, kitbash, and paint some fantastic miniatures. And you're gonna. I promise. See ya.